Mr. Charles was a man of immense wealth, his life defined by extravagance and a sense of superiority. He moved through the world with an air of arrogance, believing that his fortune made him better than those around him. To the less fortunate, he showed little empathy, seeing them as mere inconveniences in his pursuit of opulence. His motivation stemmed from a deep-seated desire to impress and dominate, always ensuring that his social gatherings were the talk of the town. His cold demeanor and elitist behavior left many intimidated and others resentful. Yet, beneath this grand facade lay insecurities that he masked with his wealth. Mr. Albert, in stark contrast, was a humble old man whose presence was a quiet whisper against the loud clamor of society's elite. Despite his modest means, there was an air of mystery about him, a past that few knew but many speculated about. Mr. Albert had once been a talented musician, his life filled with the melodies and harmonies that now seemed like distant memories. The hardships of life had tempered his spirit, making him both resilient and compassionate. His humility was his shield, and his unknown talent was his hidden treasure. Unlike Mr. Charles, he did not seek validation through material wealth. Their relationship was marked by a stark imbalance. Mr. Charles, in his grandeur, saw Mr. Albert as an opportunity to showcase his own superiority. He believed that inviting Mr. Albert to his lavish parties would be a novel form of entertainment for his esteemed guests. The perceived inferiority of Mr. Albert fed into Mr. Charles's sense of self-importance, reinforcing his belief that wealth equated to worth. Mr. Albert, however, approached Mr. Charles with quiet dignity, aware of the societal chasm between them but unfazed by it. He understood his own value was not diminished by the lack of material wealth. Mr. Charles's motivations were driven by a desire to maintain his image and assert his dominance. His emotions were often cloaked in a veneer of indifference, but beneath the surface, there was a constant need for validation from his peers. He thrived on the admiration of his guests, using his wealth as a tool to manipulate and control. His parties were his stage, and every event was meticulously planned to reflect his status and influence. The thought of someone as unassuming as Mr. Albert disrupting this facade was both unthinkable and amusing to him. Mr. Albert's past was rich with experiences that belied his current status. As a young man, he had been a prodigious pianist, his music enchanting those who heard it. However, life's challenges had diverted his path, leading him to a simpler, more modest existence. Despite this, he retained his love for music, playing in the shadows where few could hear. His emotions were complex, a blend of nostalgia for what once was and contentment with what is. He held no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance and an enduring hope that beauty still had a place in the world. The motivations and emotions of Mr. Albert were shaped by his life experiences. Unlike Mr. Charles, his actions were guided by a deep sense of humility and compassion. His desire to play the piano was not for fame or recognition, but for the sheer love of the art. He found joy in the simple act of creating music, a joy that was untouched by the world's judgment. His life was a testament to the belief that true worth comes from within, not from external validation. This belief would soon be tested in the most public of arenas. Mr. Charles's elitist behavior was evident in his interactions with others. He often dismissed those he deemed unworthy of his attention, surrounding himself with individuals who reinforced his inflated self-image. His parties were exclusive, a gathering of the wealthy and influential, where he could shine as the magnanimous host. His disdain for those less fortunate was thinly veiled, manifesting in subtle jabs and condescending remarks. Yet, this very behavior would set the stage for an unexpected revelation, one that would challenge his deeply held beliefs. In contrast, Mr. Albert's interactions were marked by kindness and humility. He treated everyone with respect, regardless of their social status. His life had taught him the value of empathy and understanding, lessons that were reflected in his every action. He did not seek to impress or dominate, but to connect and uplift. His talent, hidden from the world, was a gift that he cherished privately. Little did he know, this talent would soon become the focal point of a dramatic turn of events, altering the dynamics of his relationship with Mr. Charles. The initial relationship between Mr. Charles and Mr. Albert was one of perceived superiority and humble submission. Mr. Charles viewed Mr. Albert as a tool to further his own social standing, while Mr. Albert saw Mr. Charles as a symbol of the societal challenges he had faced. Despite this, there was a mutual recognition of each other's existence, a silent acknowledgement of their vastly different worlds. This tenuous connection would soon be put to the test, as an unexpected opportunity for Mr. Albert to showcase his hidden talent arose, setting the stage for a profound transformation. The stage was set for a confrontation of values and abilities. Mr. Charles's world of opulence and arrogance would clash with Mr. Albert's world of humility and hidden talent. The upcoming event at Mr. Charles's party, intended to be a display of Mr. Albert's supposed inadequacy, would turn into a defining moment for both men. As the day of the party approached, the anticipation grew, not only for Mr. Charles, but for Mr. Albert as well. Each was unaware of how this encounter would change their lives forever, paving the way for an unexpected twist in their intertwined destinies. The grand hall of Mr. Charles's mansion was abuzz with anticipation. Lavishly decorated, it was the epitome of opulence, every corner gleaming with the sheen of wealth and luxury. Tonight, Mr. Charles had planned something particularly special. Among the glittering chandeliers and flowing champagne, an unexpected guest would take center stage. The idea had come to him as a jest: invite Mr. Albert, the humble old man known for his unassuming demeanor, to play the piano for his elite guests. The aim was clear: to humiliate Mr. Albert and reinforce the social hierarchy. Mr. Charles's invitation to Mr. Albert had been delivered with a veneer of politeness, masking his true intentions. He had extended the invitation publicly, ensuring that it seemed like an act of kindness. The guests, privy to Mr. Charles's real motives, eagerly awaited the spectacle. They envisioned a night of laughter at Mr. Albert's expense, certain that the old man would falter under the pressure. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the wealthy attendees ready to revel in what they believed would be a display of ineptitude. Mr. Albert, despite sensing the underlying mockery, had graciously accepted the invitation. His acceptance was met with a mix of surprise and amusement. Many believed he was too naive to understand the true nature of the invite. Yet, there was a quiet resolve in Mr. Albert's eyes, unnoticed by the crowd. As he prepared for the evening, his thoughts drifted back to the days when music had been his sanctuary. He felt a mixture of nervousness and calm, aware of the challenge ahead but also confident in his abilities. The night of the party arrived, and Mr. Albert walked into the grand hall with a sense of quiet dignity. His modest attire stood in stark contrast to the lavish gowns and tailored suits that surrounded him. As he made his way to the piano, whispers and snickers followed him. The guests, including Mr. Charles, watched with barely concealed amusement. The air was electric with expectation, each attendee waiting for the moment when Mr. Albert would make a fool of himself. Little did they know, this night was set to take an unexpected turn. Mr. Charles, standing near the grand piano, welcomed Mr. Albert with a patronizing smile. His voice dripped with condescension as he introduced Mr. Albert to the crowd, embellishing the old man's humble background in a way that emphasized his supposed inferiority. The guests chuckled, readying themselves for the impending entertainment. Mr. Albert, however, remained composed. He acknowledged Mr. Charles's introduction with a nod and took his seat at the piano, his fingers gently resting on the keys. As Mr. Albert prepared to play, the room fell into an uneasy silence. The guests leaned forward in their seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Mr. Charles, confident in his plan, watched intently, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The tension was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity. Mr. Albert closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a deep breath. In that moment, the memories of his past performances flooded back, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. The intrigue among the guests grew as they observed Mr. Albert's calm demeanor. Some began to wonder if there was more to this old man than met the eye. The atmosphere shifted subtly, from one of mocking anticipation to a tentative curiosity. Mr. Charles, sensing the change, felt a flicker of unease. He dismissed it quickly, certain that Mr. Albert would soon provide the entertainment he had promised. The audience's collective breath was held as Mr. Albert's fingers began to move over the keys. With the first notes, the room was enveloped in a melody so pure and evocative that it took everyone by surprise. The initial reaction was one of stunned silence. Mr. Albert's playing was not just competent. It was masterful. Each note flowed with a grace and emotion that spoke of years of practice and an innate connection to the music. The guests, who had come expecting a spectacle of failure, found themselves entranced. The mocking smiles faded, replaced by expressions of astonishment and admiration. Mr. Charles's carefully laid plan was unraveling before his eyes. The confident smirk that had adorned his face was now replaced by a look of bewilderment. He could see his guests transforming from spectators of a farce to witnesses of a remarkable performance. The irony was not lost on him. The man he had intended to humiliate was now captivating the audience. As the music soared, so did the emotions in the room. The anticipated ridicule had turned into an unexpected celebration of talent. The performance continued, each piece played by Mr. Albert more enchanting than the last. The guests were no longer mere onlookers. They were participants in a moment of profound beauty. The music touched their hearts, breaking through the barriers of social status and prejudice. Mr. Charles, standing at the edge of the room, felt a growing sense of respect for the man he had sought to belittle. Unbeknownst to him, this night would mark the beginning of a transformation that would challenge his own perceptions and values. As the final notes of Mr. Albert's initial piece faded into silence, the room remained spellbound. Mr. Charles, struggling to regain his composure, decided to press forward with his original intent. He approached Mr. Albert, a thin veneer of politeness barely concealing his frustration. "Why don't you play us another piece, Mr. Albert?" he suggested, his voice laced with a condescending tone. The challenge was clear, and the tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Mr. Albert, with a humble nod, accepted the invitation once more. The atmosphere in the hall grew thick with anticipation. The guests, having witnessed Mr. Albert's surprising talent, were now on edge, eager to see if he could repeat his performance. Mr. Charles's demeanor had shifted from confident to cautiously watchful. The challenge had now become a test of endurance and consistency for Mr. Albert. The old man, fully aware of the stakes, took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys again, ready to meet the expectations of the skeptical audience. Mr. Albert began to play, and once more, the music filled the room with an ethereal beauty. However, this time, a subtle change was evident. There was a newfound determination in his playing, a silent resolve to prove his worth beyond any doubt. The guests, who had initially been divided between supporters and detractors, now found themselves united in their appreciation of Mr. Albert's skill. Each note resonated with a depth of emotion that spoke to the very core of the human experience, silencing any lingering doubts about his abilities. Mr. Charles, watching intently, felt a mix of emotions. His plan to humiliate Mr. Albert had backfired spectacularly, yet he couldn't deny the power of the music that now held his guests in rapt attention. The challenge he had set was becoming a double-edged sword, cutting through his own arrogance and forcing him to confront the depth of his own prejudices. As Mr. Albert's fingers danced across the keys, the music seemed to weave a tapestry of reflection and revelation, subtly shifting the dynamics of the evening. The challenge for Mr. Albert was not just to play flawlessly, but to maintain the emotional connection with his audience. He could feel their eyes on him, some still searching for a flaw, others fully immersed in the beauty of his performance. The room, once filled with the sounds of superficial conversation and laughter, was now a sanctuary of silent admiration. Mr. Albert's music had transformed the grand hall into a space where social barriers dissolved, and the true essence of humanity was laid bare. As the piece came to an end, the silence was deafening. The guests, who had been so eager to see Mr. Albert fail, were now hesitant to break the spell he had cast. Mr. Charles, feeling the weight of the challenge he had set, stepped forward once more. "Remarkable," he said, his voice betraying a hint of genuine admiration. "But surely, Mr. Albert, you must have a favorite piece, something that truly showcases your talents." The challenge was clear, and the room tensed once more as Mr. Albert accepted with a humble smile. The third piece began, and with it, Mr. Albert poured his heart and soul into the music. This was his moment to truly shine, to demonstrate the full extent of his abilities. The notes flowed with an intensity that captivated everyone present. The guests, who had been so certain of Mr. Charles's ability to dominate the evening, now found themselves in awe of the old man's resilience and talent. Each chord struck a deeper chord within them, challenging their preconceived notions and stirring a profound sense of respect. Mr. Charles, feeling increasingly cornered by the success of his unintended challenge, could only watch as Mr. Albert continued to defy his expectations. The guests, who had come to the party expecting a spectacle of ridicule, were now witnessing a masterclass in perseverance and artistry. The initial conflict, intended to belittle Mr. Albert, had instead become a testament to his inner strength and unyielding spirit. The challenge had backfired, leaving Mr. Charles to grapple with his own insecurities and biases. As the final notes of the third piece echoed through the hall, the audience erupted into applause. The challenge had been met and surpassed, leaving no doubt about Mr. Albert's exceptional talent. The guests, many of whom had harbored doubts, were now completely won over. Mr. Charles, feeling the full weight of his failed scheme, could only join in the applause, his mind racing with thoughts of how to salvage his reputation. Mr. Albert, ever humble, stood and acknowledged the crowd, his quiet dignity shining through. The conflict had reached a turning point, but the evening was far from over. The true test now lay in how Mr. Charles would respond to the unexpected shift in power. The room buzzed with excitement and curiosity, the guests eager to see what would happen next. Mr. Albert, having faced the challenge with grace and talent, had set the stage for a deeper exploration of character and transformation. The night's events had only just begun to unravel, promising further revelations and emotional upheavals. The applause gradually faded, and Mr. Albert, still seated at the piano, felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. The guests, who had come expecting a spectacle of ridicule, were now faced with an unexpected display of talent and grace. Mr. Charles, attempting to regain control of the evening, approached Mr. Albert once more. "That was quite impressive," he said, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "Surely you have one more piece to play for us?" The tension in his words was palpable, signaling the continuation of the conflict. Mr. Albert, with a composed nod, accepted the challenge. The atmosphere in the grand hall grew increasingly tense as he prepared to play again. The guests leaned forward, their expressions a blend of curiosity and anticipation. Mr. Charles, standing nearby, could feel his own emotions waver between frustration and awe. The tension in the room was almost tangible, a silent battle of wills playing out in the space between the piano and the audience. Each note that Mr. Albert played would carry the weight of this unspoken struggle. As Mr. Albert began to play, the room was once again enveloped in a blanket of sound. His fingers moved gracefully over the keys, creating a melody that was both haunting and beautiful. The guests, initially skeptical, found themselves drawn into the music, their earlier derision replaced by genuine admiration. The tension in the room began to shift, transforming into a shared experience of wonder and appreciation. Mr. Charles, watching from the sidelines, felt a pang of discomfort as his carefully constructed plan continued to unravel. The intensity of the moment was not lost on Mr. Albert. He could sense the shifting emotions in the room, the way the guests' attitudes were changing with each note. His own emotions were a complex mix of nervousness and determination. This performance was not just about proving his talent. It was about reclaiming his dignity and demonstrating that true worth transcends material wealth. The tension in his playing mirrored the tension in the room, creating a powerful connection between the musician and his audience. Mr. Charles, unable to fully mask his frustration, tried to maintain his composure. The smug confidence he had displayed at the beginning of the evening was now replaced by a strained facade of politeness. He glanced around at his guests, hoping to find some semblance of support, but instead saw expressions of awe and admiration directed towards Mr. Albert. The tension between his desire to control the situation and the undeniable impact of Mr. Albert's talent created a palpable sense of internal conflict. The guests, initially united in their expectation of ridicule, were now divided. Some whispered among themselves, expressing disbelief at Mr. Albert's skill, while others watched in silence, completely enraptured by the performance. The tension in the room had shifted from mocking anticipation to genuine curiosity. Each guest was now invested in the unfolding drama, eager to see how the evening would progress. The atmosphere was electric with the possibilities of what might happen next. As Mr. Albert continued to play, the emotions in the room reached a fever pitch. The guests, who had been so eager to see him fail, were now deeply moved by his music. The tension in their expressions gave way to a collective sense of wonder. Mr. Charles, feeling the pressure of the situation, could only watch as his plan crumbled before his eyes. The conflict he had orchestrated was now out of his control, and he struggled to find a way to regain his footing. The guests, however, were too engrossed in the performance to notice his discomfort. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as Mr. Albert approached the climax of his piece. Each note seemed to hang in the air, filled with emotion and meaning. The guests, now completely captivated, held their breath in anticipation. Mr. Charles, feeling a mix of anger and admiration, could only stand by and watch as the old man continued to defy his expectations. The conflict between them had taken on a life of its own, transforming the evening into a powerful display of resilience and talent. As the final notes of the piece echoed through the hall, the silence was deafening. The guests, caught up in the emotional intensity of the moment, were slow to react. Mr. Albert, sensing the impact of his performance, sat quietly at the piano, allowing the tension to dissipate naturally. The guests, gradually coming to their senses, erupted into applause, their earlier skepticism completely erased. Mr. Charles, feeling the full weight of his failure, could only join in, his mind racing with thoughts of how to salvage his reputation. The development of the conflict had reached a critical juncture. The guests, who had initially come to witness a spectacle of humiliation, had been transformed by the power of Mr. Albert's music. The tension between Mr. Charles and Mr. Albert had created a dynamic that none of them could have anticipated. As the applause continued, the guests looked to Mr. Charles for a response, eager to see how he would handle the situation. The evening was far from over, and the unfolding drama promised even more unexpected twists and turns. The applause filled the grand hall, resonating with a mixture of astonishment and newfound respect. Mr. Albert, still seated at the piano, felt the warmth of the audience's appreciation. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the guests absorbed the beauty and depth of his performance. Mr. Charles, struggling to maintain his composure, stepped forward once again. "Mr. Albert," he began, his voice betraying a hint of genuine admiration, "you have truly surprised us all tonight. Would you honor us with one final piece?" The request hung in the air, the room brimming with anticipation. Mr. Albert nodded graciously, accepting the invitation. The guests, now fully captivated, leaned in closer, their eyes fixed on the humble old man who had transformed the evening. The atmosphere was charged with excitement, every heartbeat echoing the tension in the room. Mr. Charles, standing at a distance, watched with a mix of frustration and curiosity. His carefully constructed plan had backfired spectacularly, yet he couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for Mr. Albert's resilience and talent. This final performance would be the true test of Mr. Albert's abilities. As Mr. Albert placed his fingers on the keys, a hush fell over the audience. The first notes rang out, filling the room with a melody that was both haunting and beautiful. The guests, who had come expecting to witness a spectacle of humiliation, were now entranced by the music. Each note seemed to carry the weight of Mr. Albert's experiences, his struggles, and his triumphs. The transformation was palpable, the atmosphere shifting from one of mockery to one of profound admiration. Mr. Charles, feeling the full impact of the moment, watched in silence. The turning point came as Mr. Albert's music reached a crescendo. The room was filled with a powerful, emotional energy that resonated deeply with every listener. The guests, who had been so eager to see Mr. Albert fail, were now moved to tears by his performance. The music spoke to the very core of their humanity, breaking down the barriers of social status and prejudice. Mr. Charles, standing at the edge of the room, felt his own emotions shift. The smug confidence that had defined him was replaced by a growing sense of humility and introspection. As the final notes of the piece echoed through the hall, the guests erupted into applause. The energy in the room was electric, the air filled with a sense of awe and respect. Mr. Albert stood and bowed, his humble demeanor contrasting sharply with the grandeur of the setting. The guests, many of whom had harbored doubts about his abilities, now saw him in a new light. Mr. Charles, feeling the weight of his own misjudgment, stepped forward. "Mr. Albert," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "you have shown us all the true power of music. Thank you." The climax of the evening had transformed not only Mr. Albert's standing, but also the very fabric of the social gathering. The guests, who had arrived with expectations of ridicule, were now united in their admiration for Mr. Albert. The Grand Hall, once a symbol of opulence and arrogance, had become a place of profound connection and shared humanity. Mr. Charles, grappling with his own emotions, felt a sense of humility that he had never experienced before. The turning point had not only showcased Mr. Albert's talent, but had also revealed the true nature of worth and dignity. As the guests continued to applaud, many stepped forward to express their gratitude to Mr. Albert. The atmosphere was one of celebration and reflection, the evening taking on a new significance. Mr. Charles, feeling a deep sense of regret for his initial intentions, approached Mr. Albert with an outstretched hand. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I misjudged you, and I am truly sorry." Mr. Albert, ever gracious, accepted the apology with a warm smile. "Thank you, Mr. Charles," he replied. "Tonight has been a lesson for us all." The guests, witnessing this exchange, felt a renewed sense of respect for both men. The evening had shifted from a superficial display of wealth to a meaningful exploration of character and resilience. The turning point had brought about a transformation that none of them could have anticipated. Mr. Albert's music had not only touched their hearts, but had also bridged the gap between different worlds. The Grand Hall, filled with applause and admiration, stood as a testament to the power of humility and talent. As the applause slowly subsided, the guests began to reflect on the evening's events. The climax had revealed the true essence of Mr. Albert's character and the profound impact of his music. Mr. Charles, humbled by the experience, realized that true worth is not measured by material wealth, but by the strength of one's character. The guests, inspired by Mr. Albert's performance, left the Grand Hall with a newfound appreciation for the power of music and the importance of humility. The turning point had set the stage for a deeper understanding and a lasting transformation. The applause finally faded, but the warmth it left lingered in the Grand Hall. Mr. Albert, standing beside the piano, felt the genuine admiration of the guests washing over him like a comforting wave. The transformation in their attitudes was palpable, a testament to the profound impact his music had made. The room, once filled with an air of elitism and superficiality, now brimmed with a newfound respect and humility. Mr. Charles, visibly moved, stepped forward to address the gathering. His voice, for the first time that evening, carried a tone of sincere contrition and respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Charles began, his eyes scanning the room filled with his distinguished guests, "tonight, we have witnessed something truly extraordinary. Mr. Albert has shown us that true talent and character can shine through the most unexpected circumstances." His words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the condescending tone he had used earlier. The guests nodded in agreement, their previous skepticism replaced by genuine admiration for the humble pianist who had captivated their hearts. Mr. Albert, ever gracious, accepted the ovation with a humble smile. As the guests approached him, one by one, to express their gratitude and admiration, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This night had been more than just a performance. It had been a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of music. The grand hall, filled with the echoes of applause and heartfelt conversations, stood as a reminder that true worth is found not in wealth or status, but in the depth of one's character and the ability to touch others' lives. Among the guests, many approached Mr. Albert to apologize for their earlier attitudes. Their words of regret and gratitude were heartfelt, a sincere acknowledgement of their misjudgment. Mr. Charles, feeling the weight of his own actions, was among the first to offer a personal apology. "Mr. Albert," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I am truly sorry for underestimating you and for my attempts to belittle you. Your performance has humbled me in ways I cannot fully express." Mr. Albert, with his characteristic grace, accepted the apology warmly. The guests, witnessing this exchange, felt a profound sense of respect for both men. The evening had shifted from a potential spectacle of humiliation to a powerful demonstration of forgiveness and mutual respect. The Grand Hall, once a symbol of Mr. Charles's wealth and power, had become a place of heartfelt connections and personal transformations. The atmosphere was one of celebration and reflection, each guest leaving with a deeper understanding of the values that truly matter in life. As the night progressed, many guests shared stories of how Mr. Albert's music had touched their lives. The conversations were filled with warmth and sincerity, the earlier tension and elitism forgotten. Mr. Charles, listening to these stories, felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events. He realized that his initial plan to humiliate Mr. Albert had led to a night of profound revelations and emotional connections. The resolution of the evening was not just about acknowledging Mr. Albert's talent, but also about recognizing the shared humanity that connected them all. Mr. Albert, reflecting on the night's events, felt a deep sense of peace. The resolution of the evening had surpassed his expectations, transforming a potential moment of ridicule into a celebration of resilience and talent. The guests, who had initially come to witness a spectacle of humiliation, were now leaving with hearts full of admiration and respect. The Grand Hall, once a stage for superficial displays of wealth, had become a place where true character and talent were celebrated. As the final guests prepared to leave, many approached Mr. Charles to express their gratitude for the evening's unexpected turn. "Thank you for inviting Mr. Albert," one guest said. "His performance was truly inspiring and has given us all much to reflect on." Mr. Charles, humbled by their words, nodded in agreement. The resolution of the evening had not only highlighted Mr. Albert's extraordinary talent, but also challenged each guest to reconsider their own values and attitudes. The Grand Hall, now a symbol of shared humanity, resonated with the echoes of this transformation. Mr. Charles, standing alone in the Grand Hall after the last guest had departed, reflected on the night's events. The resolution had been a powerful reminder of the importance of humility and the transformative power of genuine talent. The initial intention to humiliate Mr. Albert had led to a profound personal journey for both himself and his guests. Mr. Charles felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons learned and the connections made. The Grand Hall, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers, stood as a testament to the evening's unexpected yet heartwarming resolution. The night had come full circle, from a potential spectacle of mockery to a profound celebration of human resilience and talent. Mr. Albert's performance had touched the hearts of all present, transforming their perceptions and fostering a deeper understanding of true worth. The resolution of the evening was a powerful reminder that true character and talent shine brightest in the face of adversity. The guests, leaving with hearts full of admiration, knew that this night would remain etched in their memories as a testament to the transformative power of humility and genuine talent. The grand hall of Mr. Charles's mansion was a masterpiece of luxury and elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries and expensive artwork, each piece a testament to Mr. Charles's exquisite taste and wealth. The long banquet tables were covered in fine linen and adorned with delicate china and sparkling glassware. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the rich aroma of gourmet dishes, creating an atmosphere of opulence that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Mr. Albert, in his modest attire, was a striking contrast to the grandeur of the setting. His clothes, simple and unadorned, spoke of a life lived far from the trappings of wealth. Yet, there was a quiet dignity in his appearance that commanded respect. His face, lined with the marks of time and experience, exuded a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the cold, polished surfaces around him. The grand piano, a magnificent instrument of polished ebony and ivory, seemed almost to gleam in anticipation of his touch. As Mr. Albert began to play, the transformation in the room was almost magical. The initial atmosphere of elitism and superiority melted away, replaced by a sense of wonder and admiration. The music, rich and resonant, filled every corner of the hall, touching the hearts of everyone present. The guests, dressed in their finest evening wear, sat in rapt attention, their earlier expressions of skepticism replaced by genuine appreciation. The room, once a showcase of material wealth, had become a sanctuary of pure, unadulterated beauty. The expressions on the guests' faces were a study in transformation. Eyes that had once been filled with judgment and condescension now shone with admiration and respect. Smiles, once mocking, were now genuine and heartfelt. As the music flowed, the guests leaned forward, their attention wholly captured by Mr. Albert's performance. The subtle play of light and shadow in the room seemed to dance in time with the music, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. It was as if the very soul of the grand hall had been awakened by the magic of Mr. Albert's talent. The piano itself seemed to come alive under Mr. Albert's skilled hands. Each key he pressed produced a sound that was rich and full, resonating deeply within the hearts of the listeners. The music was a tapestry of emotions, weaving together themes of joy, sorrow, hope, and resilience. The guests could feel the story that Mr. Albert was telling through his music, each note a brushstroke in a masterpiece of sound. The grand hall, with its opulent decor and sumptuous surroundings, was the perfect backdrop for this extraordinary performance. The transformation of the guests' expressions was a testament to the power of Mr. Albert's music. Faces that had been closed off and indifferent were now open and animated, reflecting a range of emotions from joy to contemplation. The earlier tension in the room had dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of wonder and connection. The grand hall, once a symbol of Mr. Charles's wealth and power, had become a place of unity and shared humanity. The music had created a bridge between different worlds, bringing together people from diverse backgrounds in a moment of collective appreciation. The atmosphere in the grand hall was one of quiet reverence. The guests, who had initially come to the party with expectations of superficial entertainment, were now deeply moved by the depth and beauty of Mr. Albert's performance. The room was filled with a sense of stillness and peace, the music providing a moment of respite from the outside world. The grand hall, with its towering ceilings and ornate decor, seemed almost to embrace the music, the sound echoing off the walls and filling the space with a sense of magic and wonder. As Mr. Albert played, the sensory details of the evening came alive. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast a warm light over the polished surfaces, creating a sense of intimacy despite the grandeur of the setting. The scent of fresh flowers and gourmet dishes blended harmoniously with the rich tones of the piano, creating a feast for the senses. The guests, fully immersed in the experience, could almost feel the music as a physical presence, its vibrations resonating through their bodies and souls. The Grand Hall, a monument to luxury, had become a place of profound emotional connection. The final notes of Mr. Albert's performance hung in the air, their echoes fading slowly into the silence. The guests, who had been so eager to see him fail, were now united in their admiration and respect. The room, once filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, was now hushed and contemplative. The Grand Hall, with its opulent decor and elegant surroundings, had been transformed by the power of Mr. Albert's music. The sensory details of the evening, the light, the scent, the sound, had all contributed to an unforgettable experience that had touched the hearts of everyone present. As the evening drew to a close, the Grand Hall remained bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers. The guests, still buzzing with the emotional impact of Mr. Albert's performance, began to take their leave. The atmosphere was one of quiet reflection, the earlier sense of elitism and superficiality replaced by a deep appreciation for the power of music and the resilience of the human spirit. The Grand Hall, a symbol of opulence and luxury, had become a place of profound transformation and shared humanity. The sensory details of the evening, the light, the scent, the sound, would linger in the memories of all who had been present, a testament to the extraordinary power of Mr. Albert's talent. The Grand Hall, now quiet and serene, bore witness to the profound emotional journey that had unfolded throughout the evening. Mr. Albert, having played his heart out, stood quietly by the piano, his humble demeanor a stark contrast to the grandiosity of the setting. The guests, still processing the evening's events, felt a deep sense of empathy for Mr. Albert. His music had touched them in ways they hadn't anticipated, forging a connection that transcended social status and wealth. The emotional resonance of his performance lingered in the air, creating a bond between the musician and his audience. Mr. Albert's vulnerability had been laid bare through his music, and the guests could feel the depth of his emotions. Each note he played carried with it a piece of his soul, revealing a life of struggle, resilience, and unyielding hope. This raw, unfiltered expression of emotion created a powerful sense of empathy among the audience. They saw beyond his modest appearance to the richness of his inner world. This connection was a stark reminder of the shared human experience, where true worth is measured by character and not by material possessions. Mr. Charles, watching from the sidelines, felt a profound shift within himself. The evening had begun as an attempt to reinforce his own superiority, but it had evolved into a journey of self-reflection and transformation. He realized the depth of his own misconceptions and prejudices. The emotional connection he felt with Mr. Albert's music was undeniable, breaking down the barriers he had constructed around himself. The vulnerability and sincerity in Mr. Albert's performance had opened Mr. Charles's heart, making him reconsider the values he had long held dear. The guests, too, were deeply moved by the emotional depth of Mr. Albert's performance. Many found themselves reflecting on their own lives and the superficial values that often govern their actions. The music had sparked a collective introspection, prompting them to question their assumptions and prejudices. The Grand Hall, once a place of elitism and social posturing, had become a sanctuary for genuine human connection. The emotional impact of Mr. Albert's music had created a sense of unity and shared understanding among the guests. As the evening progressed, the emotional connection between Mr. Albert and the audience only deepened. Guests approached him, not just to praise his talent, but to share their own stories of struggle and resilience. These heartfelt conversations bridged the gap between different social worlds, creating a tapestry of shared human experiences. Mr. Albert listened with kindness and humility, his own story resonating with the narratives of those around him. The Grand Hall, with its opulent decor, now felt like a gathering place for kindred spirits, united by their newfound sense of empathy and understanding. Mr. Charles, witnessing these interactions, felt a sense of awe and humility. He approached Mr. Albert once more, this time with genuine respect and admiration. "Mr. Albert," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "you have given us a gift tonight. Your music has touched our hearts and opened our eyes. Thank you for sharing your incredible talent with us." Mr. Albert, ever gracious, smiled warmly. "Music is a language of the soul, Mr. Charles. It connects us in ways words cannot. I am grateful for this opportunity to share it with you all." The guests, inspired by Mr. Albert's words, felt a renewed sense of connection with one another. The emotional journey they had embarked upon together had transformed their perceptions and deepened their understanding of true worth. The Grand Hall, once a symbol of division, had become a place of unity and shared humanity. The emotional connection forged through Mr. Albert's music was a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy, kindness, and mutual respect. The guests left with hearts full of gratitude and minds open to the possibilities of meaningful change. As the night drew to a close, Mr. Albert reflected on the profound impact of his performance. The emotional connection he had established with the guests was a testament to the power of music and the resilience of the human spirit. The Grand Hall, now bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers, stood as a silent witness to the evening's transformation. Mr. Albert felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had touched the hearts of those around him. The connections made that night would leave a lasting impression on all who had been present. Mr. Charles, too, felt the weight of the evening's lessons. He realized that true greatness lay not in wealth or status, but in the ability to connect with others on a deeply human level. The emotional journey he had experienced had humbled him, making him reconsider the values that had once driven him. He approached Mr. Albert one last time, extending his hand in a gesture of sincere friendship. "Thank you, Mr. Albert, for reminding us of what truly matters," he said. Mr. Albert, with a warm smile, shook his hand. "It is never too late to learn, Mr. Charles." The guests departed, carrying with them the profound emotional connections they had made. The Grand Hall, now quiet and serene, was a testament to the transformative power of music and human empathy. Mr. Albert's performance had not only showcased his extraordinary talent, but had also created a lasting bond between the guests. The emotional journey they had shared would remain etched in their hearts, a reminder of the importance of humility, kindness, and genuine human connection. The evening had come to an end, but the lessons learned and the connections made would endure. The evening had reached its profound conclusion, and the guests left Mr. Charles's Grand Hall with hearts full of admiration and minds open to new perspectives. Mr. Albert's music had woven a tapestry of shared humanity and resilience, leaving an indelible mark on all who had attended. As the final echoes of the night's performances faded, a sense of quiet reflection settled over the mansion. The lessons learned and the emotional connections made would continue to resonate long after the last guest had departed. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. If you were moved by Mr. Albert's incredible story and the transformative power of his music, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't miss out on the next inspiring tale that awaits you. Just click on the video appearing on your screen to continue experiencing the magic of human resilience and talent. And if you believe in the power of these stories to touch hearts and change lives, please consider supporting our work by visiting the link in the pinned comment. Your contribution will help us bring more heartfelt and emotional stories to life, ensuring that the message of hope, empathy, and connection reaches as many people as possible. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications to stay updated with the best emotional stories delivered daily. Share your thoughts and connect with our community in the comments below. Your engagement is what drives us to continue sharing these powerful narratives. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next story.